In the bitter chill of Eastern Europe, history is repeating itself. Once again, the roar of tanks echoes across the plains. But this time, it is not the Panzers of the Second World War, it is the Leopard 2, Germany's most advanced main battle tank. A weapon of modern engineering, precision, and lethality, now finding itself on the front line of the most volatile conflict of the 21st century, the war in Ukraine. Few could have imagined that Berlin, long reluctant to send heavy armor into a war zone, would break decades of caution. Yet the Leopard 2's arrival marked a turning point. For Russia, it was a symbol of escalation they never expected. For Ukraine, it was hope forged in steel. This is the story of how Germany's Leopard 2 became the most controversial tank of our era. The Leopard 2 is more than just a machine. It is a symbol of German engineering, NATO's strength, and Europe's collective defense identity. Designed during the Cold War to stop Soviet armored divisions sweeping through the Fulda Gap, the Leopard 2 was meant for a war that never came. With over 3,500 built and exported to more than 15 countries, it became Europe's tank of choice. From Poland to Finland, from Spain to Greece, armies trusted its blend of speed, firepower, and survivability. But symbols carry weight. And when Ukraine pleaded for tanks to push back Russian offensives, Germany hesitated. Sending Leopards to Ukraine was not just about military aid, it was about history, politics, and the future of European security. For decades after World War II, Germany walked a careful line. Its constitution and its conscience made military restraint a cornerstone of policy. Heavy weapons exports, especially tanks, were politically toxic. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Berlin provided helmets before bullets. Critics mocked the hesitation. Allies pressured Germany to do more. But tanks? Tanks crossed a psychological threshold. Chancellor Olaf Scholz faced enormous pressure, domestically and internationally. Poland, backed by other NATO states, pushed Berlin to authorize Leopard transfers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insisted these tanks could change the war. But within Germany, memories of history whispered warnings. Would German tanks once again roll east against Russian forces? By late 2022, the war had reached a grinding stalemate. Russia fortified occupied territories. Ukraine prepared counteroffensives. Both sides burned through equipment at an astonishing rate. The Leopard 2 debate became global news. Germany faced criticism for dragging its feet. The United States offered Abrams tanks, but only after months of delay, citing logistical complexity. The UK pledged Challenger 2S. Still, the spotlight remained on Berlin. Why Leopards? Because they were already in Europe, already in NATO inventories, and logistically feasible to deploy quickly. Unlike the US Abrams, which guzzled jet fuel, the Leopard ran on diesel. Unlike the Challenger 2, which was available in limited numbers, Leopards were plentiful. It was the tank Ukraine needed most, and the one Russia feared most. January 25, 2023. Under mounting international pressure, Chancellor Scholz made the historic announcement. Germany would send Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine and authorize allies to do the same. The decision marked a seismic shift in German policy. For the first time since World War II, German tanks would fight Russian forces, albeit indirectly through Ukrainian crews. Berlin pledged 14 Leopard 2A6 tanks. Other European partners soon followed: Poland, Spain, Norway, Finland, and more. In total, dozens of Leopards were promised. For Ukraine, the news was electrifying. For Russia, it was infuriating. Kremlin spokesman declared the Leopards doomed to burn, vowing swift destruction. State media portrayed it as a direct German provocation, reviving old scars of the Second World War. Why did Russia take this so seriously? The Leopard 2 was not just another tank, it was one of the most lethal weapons of its kind. Firepower, equipped with the Rheinmetall 120 mm smoothbore gun, the Leopard could fire armor-piercing rounds capable of shredding Russian T-72 and T-90 tanks at ranges exceeding 3 kilometers. Protection. Its modular composite armor was designed to withstand shaped charges and kinetic penetrators, making it one of the most survivable tanks on the battlefield. Mobility. Despite weighing over 60 tons, its MTU diesel engine gave it a top speed of 70 kilometers per h. In comparison, many Russian tanks struggled with reliability and speed. Optics and sensors. Advanced thermal imaging and laser rangefinders gave Leopard crews an edge in night combat, where Russian tanks often faltered. The Leopard 2 represented Western combined arms doctrine, not just brute force, but precision, survivability, and integration with NATO systems. The Kremlin's outrage was not just propaganda. The Leopards posed a genuine battlefield challenge. Russia's armored doctrine relied heavily on massed formations of T-series tanks, tanks that had already suffered catastrophic losses against modern Western anti-tank weapons, like the Javelin and NLAW. The Leopard threatened to tilt the balance further. With superior range, accuracy, and survivability, Leopards could dominate Russian tanks in direct duels. In response, Russia accelerated its production of upgraded T-90M tanks, deployed more anti-tank missile systems, and prioritized drones to hunt Western armor. Yet the very fact that Russia adjusted strategy was proof the Leopards had altered the equation. The Leopard 2's arrival was more than a transfer of steel. It was a political earthquake. For Germany, it was the end of hesitation. For Ukraine, it was a chance to push forward. For Russia, it was an unexpected challenge to its narrative of dominance. But as the tanks crossed the border, one question remained. Would the Leopard 2 live up to its reputation, or meet the same fate as the countless armored giants that came before it? The Frontline was about to reveal the truth. When the first Leopard 2 tanks reached Ukraine in the spring of 2023, the world watched with anticipation. Ukrainian crews, trained rapidly in Poland and Germany, climbed into machines that represented both cutting-edge technology and immense responsibility. Their baptism of fire came quickly. In June, during Ukraine's counter-offensive in Zaporizhia, Leopards spearheaded assaults against fortified Russian positions. For the first time, NATO standard armor clashed directly with Russia's T-72S, T-80S, and the much-vaunted T-90M. The images spread fast, Leopards maneuvering through minefields, exchanging fire with Russian tanks, taking hits, and continuing to fight. The battlefield was unforgiving, layered with artillery, drones, and entrenched defenses. The Leopard's reputation was tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. The Leopard's combat record was mixed, as is true for any weapon in modern warfare. In several engagements, Leopards demonstrated clear superiority. Their long-range firepower allowed Ukrainian crews to knock out Russian tanks before they could even return fire. Thermal optics provided critical advantages in night operations, where Russian forces struggled. But the battlefield was merciless. Several Leopards were disabled by mines, artillery barrages, and concentrated anti-tank fire. Russian drones quickly circulated footage of damaged Leopards, declaring them burning coffins. Western analysts countered, many of the tanks hit were recoverable, their crews surviving thanks to superior armor protection. For Ukraine, the Leopards were invaluable assets. For Russia, their destruction became a propaganda priority. Each side understood, beyond steel and firepower, this was a war of perception. The Leopard 2's presence forced Russia to adapt. Attack helicopters. Russia increased reliance on Ka-52 Alligator helicopters, armed with Viker anti-tank missiles. These long-range strikes became one of the biggest threats to Ukrainian armor. Kamikaze drones, Lancet drones, cheap but effective, hunted Leopards from above, exploiting their exposed topside armor. Layered defenses, minefields, artillery kill zones, and anti-tank ambushes were designed specifically to slow Leopard advances. Propaganda war. Russian state media emphasized every destroyed Leopard, regardless of whether it was knocked out permanently or only temporarily disabled. Yet these countermeasures also revealed weakness. For Russia to stop Leopards, it had to concentrate resources, drones, missiles, mines, into areas where the tanks were expected. In doing so, they stretched their own defenses thinner elsewhere. Ukraine adapted as well. They quickly learned that the Leopard was not invincible, but it was highly effective when used correctly. Instead of charging headlong into fortified lines, Leopards were integrated into combined arms tactics, infantry coordination. Infantry screened ahead to clear mines and neutralize anti-tank teams. Drone reconnaissance. Drones scouted for ambushes, guiding Leopards to safer routes. Repair and amp recovery. Damaged Leopards were swiftly recovered and repaired, returning to battle within days. Selective deployment. Instead of spreading Leopards thinly, Ukraine concentrated them in critical sectors, using them as breakthrough forces rather than attritional tools. The result was a learning curve, steep but effective. Over time, Ukrainian crews grew confident, proving that with proper tactics, the Leopard 2 could dominate even in the harshest battlefield conditions. Perhaps the Leopard's greatest weapon was psychological. For Russian troops, the sight of a Leopard on the horizon carried weight. Stories spread quickly of its accuracy, its survivability, its ability to withstand hits that would have destroyed a Russian T-72. For Ukrainians, Leopards became a morale booster. Villages welcomed them as symbols of Western solidarity. Soldiers nicknamed them steel beasts, treating them with reverence. And for the West, the deployment reinforced the narrative of unity against aggression. Every Leopard in Ukraine was not just a tank. It was a political message, a declaration that Europe would not stand idle. Yet with glory came cost. Operating Leopard 2S in Ukraine proved logistically complex. Spare parts had to be flown in or transported over land. Ammunition, 120 mm NATO rounds, was not compatible with Soviet stocks, creating supply chain challenges. Financially, the commitment was enormous. Each Leopard 2A6 cost between $12 million to replace. The cost of ammunition, maintenance, and crew training added millions more. But the calculus was clear. The cost of tanks was far outweighed by the cost of losing the war. For Germany and its allies, Leopards were not merely aid, they were an investment in Europe's security order. For Russia, the arrival of Leopards carried echoes of history. Once again, German tanks faced Russian forces on eastern soil. The symbolism was powerful and deeply unsettling to the Kremlin. Moscow's military planners had anticipated Western arms, but not Germany's heavy armor. They had expected caution, hesitation, reluctance. Instead, they were confronted with a decisive breach of German restraint. The Leopard's deployment proved that the West was willing to escalate, to provide not just defensive aid but offensive capabilities. For Russia, this was a strategic shock, one that undermined their confidence and reshaped their narrative of inevitable victory. The Leopard 2 story in Ukraine is still being written. Some have been lost in battle, others continue to fight. But their legacy is already clear. They symbolized Europe's unity against aggression. They changed the tactical equation on the battlefield. They marked Germany's transformation from cautious bystander to central player in European security. Whether the Leopards ultimately tipped the balance of the war remains uncertain. But one truth is undeniable: Russia never expected them. The Leopard 2 is not invincible. No machine of war is, but its journey from German factories to Ukrainian front lines tells a deeper story. A story of nations overcoming history, of soldiers adapting to modern battlefields, of alliances tested and renewed. And in the cold, muddy fields of Ukraine, where the roar of engines mixes with the thunder of artillery, one thing became clear: the Leopard 2 was more than steel. It was resolve, defiance, and a message to Moscow that the world was watching, and that Ukraine would not stand alone.